Mikey V, it's good to see you, brother.
Todd, it is good to be back.
Yeah, it is. It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while. So it's nice to have you on the podcast as we're kind of close out the year. It's been a busy 12 months. There's no question about it. So
12 months, you've been busy making content. So it's been fun to see that.
I have. It's been good from the standpoint of I've probably gotten a little bit more religious about writing. And then not writing just simple stuff. I think, as the year went on, I think just getting into the practice of writing a couple times a week. I'd never done that before. I'm not a writer. And I think over time, figuring out how to do that and then adding higher quality stuff. And so I would say, it's getting better. I think finding topics and then finding stuff that's interesting has been good. But the response on Substack has been really positive. I mean, I think we're definitely growing. We started this thing at the beginning of March, I think. And I think we're up to like 8,400, subscribers on the Substack. So that's pretty cool. And I think you were looking at some of the stats, over 250,000 views for the year. So that's pretty cool. That's not bad.
What a year. Those numbers are more than 10x what they were last year, Todd. So and it's just great to be able to help founders, not only founders that are in our program, but one of the things I've noticed is just the number of founders who are engaging with our content that are at various stages in their build process and are running into some of the same issues. And it's been really validating to see some of those things turn into real products that are growing in the market.
Yeah, and I think just the network of people you get to meet, which is kind of interesting. I've met folks from all around the globe that have reached out, as well as people domestically, and just building some new connections. And so it's probably one of the better things personally I've done is just writing online. It's you gotta put yourself out there, but once you do, it's been kind of interesting. So that's been positive. We probably weren't as consistent on the podcast as I would like. We didn't get as many, and so again, I think the theme of this whole discussion is really using AI tools to basically accelerate some of the work that we're doing. I think our team has done a great job of helping me find people to get on the podcast, vet them as far as their ability to like really add value to our audience. And so I think we've had some really good successes where somebody sends us an email and within 30 minutes we can tell them, hey, do you want to get scheduled or not? And so that's pretty exciting for me as we go into 2025.
That's an example of like a 10x improvement, right? I mean, if you look at the amount of time it took to find a podcast guest, reach out to them. I mean, it was more than 10x. And it's amazing how you can go from no podcast to a podcast to improving the speed by 10 times on adding guests. That's amazing.
Yeah, and maybe we just like take 2 seconds to like talk about like that workflow, because before somebody we were getting inquiries, maybe 5 to 7 a week of people that wanted to be on the podcast. That's flattering. But on the flip side, are they a good fit for us, right? And so I think the next thing I have to do is I go listen to a bunch of podcasts. I got to go watch a YouTube video or something that they're on, or look through their social media. And that just takes time. And I don't care if it's like listening or if it's reading a script, like it just takes time. And so now I think with our process and using Notebook LM from Google and basically putting all that in there and then doing some queries, very quickly you can find, is there a good fit and a match for some of the unique experiences they have, and does it fit for our clientele? So like just that and the tools that we've been using has made a huge impact. So appreciate Priya and the team for doing this.
Yeah, you bet.
So, I've been pretty busy, but you have been busy as well. I mean, I think we've added some full-time staff. You wear multiple hats. But like, what would you say are some of the things that you've really kind of focused on as being key to kind of growth for this year?
Well, one of them is actually just really in line with what you're talking about, using AI in some of the front end stuff that you're doing. We've been putting AI into almost every corner of our program, from generating content that uses best practices to actually assisting founders with using AI throughout the process. So even right at the beginning, before they even get into Wildfire, we're doing differentiation analysis using AI to help them to make sure they have a highly unique idea. And then once they get in the program, no longer do they need to design screens with, one of those WYSIWYG editors where they're dragging buttons onto screens, but using AI to generate layouts, to using AI to build their apps. And then once you get into go-to-market, it allows founders to much more rapidly iterate on their go-to-market content and then test different messages in the market. And so, AI is not only in the products that our founders are building, but it's worming its way into every aspect of how they design, build, and launch their apps. And it's something that I think we're really in the early stages of right now. And the speed at which we're able to evolve the Wildfire program to help founders to use AI as they build and how they build is becoming, I think, key, because I think speed is everything when you're doing a startup. And saying to a founder, go use AI without embedding AI into every step in your process, I think is a real missed opportunity. So I think, even a year ago, I sort of didn't see all of the different places that we could add AI into our process. And it wasn't until we started to experiment with every single piece of our process, embedding AI into it, you realize how much faster. And there's multiple things that are 10x faster when you look at using AI to make them happen.
Yeah, and I would say it's not perfect. For a lot of our stuff, it's okay. Like, I mean, even some of the stuff we're doing, whether it's social media or marketing messages or any of that sort of stuff, I do think that, and it's only going to get better, right? I mean, I think that's the part is this is the worst we're probably going to see it, and it's going to go forward. What I think is interesting too is we're stitching a lot of stuff together where I feel like you and I keep talking about like we need a framework to hang all this stuff off of, right? Where it's like, there may be 25 things in our business that we want to automate. And we can use these tools to get better at it, but stitching them all together so that they go from, step one, step two, step three, and there's some workflow and there's some Boolean equation or there's some if-then statements in it. Like that stuff is hard today, but you would hope in 2025 we'll see more of that being stitched together or frameworks that'll allow us to do that.
Yeah, and just the chain reasoning, technology is pretty young. I mean, you saw ChatGPT add that this year, but it's still pretty young. So I think combining that chain reasoning with some of these workflow layers, and even just having AI agent to agent communication figured out, there's a bunch of attempts at doing that right now. A lot of them are still academic.
Yeah.
When you start to see those turned into real frameworks where you can plug in APIs to them, I think a lot of that stuff will get smoother. So it's exciting to see like all these sort of desperate things we're doing in our process come together into one automated process. I think that's going to be essential for founders to build into their businesses early on as they scale, because it allows you to scale with a lot less friction, because you can scale a process without having to add people to it. And talent's going to just get increasingly difficult. I know some people are worried that AI is going to remove jobs, but I think it's going to create tons of jobs because you got to go figure all this stuff out. So I think that's pretty exciting too. So on that note, the second big thing we did this year is we added masterminds to our program. We've just
not AI.
Not AI masterminds. Not AI. There's a human element of this that is super important, and so a lot of why we use AI is so that we can spend more time with people, because our founders are at the center of what we do. We've just seen over and over and over that entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs is just us, and so masterminds are another way that we've added, where every 2 weeks founders sit down with other founders that are in the exact same build stage that they are. So whether they're in customer interviews, build, go to market, or scaling, getting into a group of other founders who are really trying to master those same problems has been super rewarding, because it allows us to knowledge share in real time, and I think is helping us make the program better, faster. But it's also allowing founders to learn from one another and their own strengths and weaknesses. Every founder has a technical background, a product background, or a sales background, and these masterminds are giving founders a community where they can grow in their areas of weakness and also share best practices. Todd, you've been involved in that too. So it's been fun to see your mastermind that you've been building to, start to see some of those companies really grow. So you've got some founders that are starting to really hit it in your mastermind. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, maybe just add a little more color to it too. I think every founder knows that there's just 50 number one priorities. And I think what we're really trying to do in the mastermind is say, what is the one or two thing that you really need to do? And I think sometimes it's not always clear, right? It's not always clear that saying, like I've got tons of things coming at me. Am I picking the right things to focus on? And so I do think that's part of what the mastermind is able to do, is to create some focus on the most important thing, and then get to some memory of like just executing. Because if you did what you said 2 weeks ago and it was the number one priority, you're going to make traction in your business. And if you start compounding that after 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, lots of positive things happen. And I think that's where you just basically started, right? Like it's like we've got a bunch of founders that are in our program in the mastermind that are starting to progress. I think you said something to the effect of we've probably gotten 10 different states, founders from 10 different states in our program this year. Which is great to hear. I mean, it's not just a regional South Dakota type of thing. It's about getting more people from more locations to come to South Dakota to build, which is exciting. And then, like we've had companies that graduated fairly recently, like Journeyman, local company in the wildland fire space. So very nichey, but on the flip side, they have a ton of domain expertise. These are guys that have been doing it. And I think they're kind of some of the demographic we're looking for, right? You don't have to have a ton of development experience, and have to have a ton of sales experience. They're just good people that understand a problem and that domain expertise deep, and they're able to bring a bunch of expertise into what does my industry really need, and we can wrap some of the tools around them. And so it's exciting to see them go from graduation to now I think they're about 1,000 users on their platform. And so, that's pretty cool that we're seeing some of that stuff come together. I think there's a theme. These masterminds, at least in mine, from a go-to-market standpoint, are going from 0 to 100,000, 100,000 to 1 million, and 1 million to 3 million. And what you're finding is if you're in that 0 to 100,000, there's some serious same core problems that you're facing. And it's really just trying to find that first handful of customers. And so optimizing the tools and the experiences and the talk track around that to focus on it is basically creating better execution on getting your first 25 or 50 customers or whatever it is in your industry. So I think it's pretty cool. We have another one in Sign Up Sports. That was one of our early ones that came through our program. They're starting to raise capital. We have AgSense is another one that's raising capital, and they're all getting ready for a growth in scale in 2025. And so that's pretty exciting to see. This is not about us finding people. It's not about them getting through the program. It's about them generating revenue and really creating some real jobs in our local community.
So one thing to note, we did this last year about this time, and we spent all of our time trying to figure out how to get them through the program. There's like a different set of challenges here we're talking about here, because I think that part is largely checked out, right? If you do the work, if you go through those stages, you can get a product with a market, with customers are going to pay. But now we're talking about a different set of problems, which is how do we get those companies that are really starting to scale up to that $1 million mark quickly? And we're really trying to compress time with that. Todd, have you seen some changes this year in those companies that have helped them to get to that $1 million faster based on some of the stuff you're working on with them?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's a continuation of what we preach in the program, right? It's really understanding your customer, ICP. It's really picking a beachhead and doubling down on it. It's also about running a series of experiments around marketing, about how to reach them, what's valuable, and not about spamming them. I think almost every single one of the customers, people that we come in is like, you have to add value. If you're going to send email, if you're going to call, you have to add value. And I think, and then again, the second piece to that is you're not throwing up on them about your feature set. You're basically trying to discover what the problem is and really validate that they have this issue so that then your solution makes more sense. So I'd say those handful of things are very repeatable, very consistent in almost every startup that we touch in this kind of $0 to $100,000 range.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that one of the things that I did wrong when I started my first company is I tried to anchor on the solution and on why my little widget was better than the other widgets. And I didn't anchor enough on the problem. And I think that the most valuable thing that I've seen come out of that mastermind is founders who are really defining the problem that they're going to go solve, getting the customer to agree during the sales process that that problem is solved using their app, and then selling becomes easy. And so I think that's been really valuable. And I think, when you start something like Wildfire, you look at what are the problems that founders are going to run into. And this is the one that it feels like solving it once you get to the go-to-market. Whether you use AI or other things, you have to do that. And if you do it well, scaling gets really fun. And specifically with Signed Up Sports, they're starting to do the beginning of figuring that out. And it's been just awesome to see them start to close business. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, and it's not as linear as we'd like to think, right? A lot of it is, these guys are just kind of going through the guerrilla warfare of like hand-to-hand combat, right? It's like, I have some ideas and I think of what messaging is going to work. They're trying to use kind of a gate structure and anchor. They're trying to use some of the techniques and tools that we've taught them, but it's messy. I think what you find is you're trying a bunch of things and you don't really get to some sort of consistent methodology until 80% of the time it works the same thing, right? Like there's always some variation, but like you have to get creative. You're saying that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let me try something else. Or they're not returning my calls. What can I do to like add value to them? And so I think a lot of what you're trying to do is just be scrappy. Be scrappy. Know it's a hand-to-hand combat. It's not some big go-to-market strategy. It's basically understand as much as you can about this prospect and then go figure out how to get one of them done. Because if one of them's done, then maybe they can give you a referral to somebody else, right? And it's just this kind of chain reaction. So I think sometimes founders come to us and they want to like boil the ocean. I got this like wonderful go-to-market strategy, and you're like, okay, but you can put that aside for a second. You just got to go find the first couple of customers, and then you can start to basically reapply your learnings to that go-to-market strategy as it scales.
Yeah, the number of experiments you have to run is way higher than you think when you do this. And the founders who run the experiment quickly and then get data back and then adjust and pivot their message are the ones who do really well. Trying to come up with some big monolith marketing plan and then run it for 3 months, it just doesn't work. Like, you can be the best, most prepared founder, but until you get out there and start talking to customers and running a marketing funnel, you just have no idea. So that's been another valuable thing about the masterminds as well, have been to have a sounding board when you conduct you run an experiment, you do a marketing campaign, and your click rate is really high, but then your open rate is really high and their click rate is crap. Like, what do you go do? How do you fix that? And then having a place where you can go figure that out together has been really fun. So
Mike, we talk a lot about adding value in a sales process, even if you're not going to buy. What do you think that means? Like, I think it's easy to say. It's a totally different thing when you're starting out and you have no customers. So you don't have a lot of collateral. You don't have test cases. Like, what do you think is a way where founders can start thinking about adding value so it doesn't come across as just spam?
Well, I think with a lot of founders, they have knowledge of the market or the industry that they can share with their prospects in a way that adds value to them. So, for example, how do you run sports camps, and how do you grow sports camps at a high level? How do you market them? How do you build loyalty in your parents and your schools around you? That's an example of a best practice that is not necessarily hooked to buying an app, but you can share with your customers in a way that adds value to their lives, whether or not they ever buy your product. It also invites a conversation to say, how could we help you do that better? Or how are you interested in doing that better? And that, obviously, if your solution is at the end of that, of the best practice of how to go build your camp system, that's an example of how you would do that. So I think that you have to look at the value proposition from the customer standpoint, is like, what is the customer's problem? How do I help them to begin to solve that problem? By giving them some piece of collateral or a survey or even a tool that they could use for free. But it leads them toward the product in a way that isn't like pushy or salesy, but still kind of paves the pathway for a product to be really, really, useful to solving the rest of that problem.
Yeah, so I think even if they don't buy, they learn something. I mean, I think that's the takeaway. And I think if you want to learn more about that, I think the Challenger Sale book is a good one. I mean, I think like a lot of the principles that we're talking about are there. I mean, we all get inundated by email. And if it's not something that's value add, I just unsubscribe, right? And so I think you got to figure out ways to do this in a creative way, even when you're just starting out. And I think, maybe to build on your last point was you have a vision for how something should be done differently. I mean, that's why you're a founder, right? And so sometimes even a voicemail that's that compelling maybe is the thing, right? That people would say, all right, I'll give them a shot, right? Like we've been doing this the same way for a long time. Maybe there is a better way. Maybe I'll talk to them. And so just don't underestimate the level of passion that you have and trying to translate that to prospects.
Yep, I totally agree with that. All right, well, let's take a step back, Todd. And we talked a little bit about AI and sort of what happened this year. I feel like 2024 was actually a little slower than 2023. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, there wasn't a Chat GPT, generation that happened this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird for us to say that it was slow, but I just think it's slow in comparison to 22 and 23, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the incremental gains in the technology seems like we're running out of data to continue to train and basically make these models continue to better. I think we're finding less hallucination in some of these. I think the chain reasoning component that you talked about with 01 with ChatGPT from OpenAI is good. I think we're starting to see some computer vision stuff from Claude, but a lot of it was almost proof of concept. I mean, at least the computer vision component of that was kind of proof of concept. I don't think it's ready for prime time. And so I guess what I'm starting to feel like is, and as I talk to other people that have industry knowledge, these things are large and they're horizontal and they've sucked up so much data. But like what's interesting is if you go into precision ag or you go into manufacturing, there's so much more domain knowledge that is not included in these large language models. And so what it's starting to lead, I think, to is this idea that maybe we're getting to more vertical ones down the road. And I know you're going to talk about this here in a second, but I just think that there's a movement from these large language models that are commercial to looking at some of these open source ones, Meta in particular, and then saying, how do I skinny these things down so that they're maybe not as expensive to run, but then have more domain knowledge? And so I don't know if you feel like that, Mike. I mean, it just seems like there's a movement in this direction for a lot of them. But like, what do you think from a verticalization standpoint?
Yeah, so I think I agree with that. And what you see also happening is the the big LLMs are sort of running out of data. You're hearing a lot of that. They're like, where am I going to get my next chunk of data to make this LLM better? And they're so big and expensive to train. There's just a limit to how much you can do with that. But in verticals, there's a whole bunch of non-public data that is only understood and sort of used by people in that industry. And you can take a horizontal LLM, and if you verticalize it with data that's specific to that vertical, and you combine that with the knowledge that those people have in that vertical of how a process goes, now you go from an LLM to an agent. And that agent is, I think, way more valuable than just a horizontal LLM, because you have that unique data combined with a really defined process that is a problem in that industry. And that knowledge, though, is actually less technical, and it's a little bit more, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's actually in the minds of the people who are in that industry that understands how that industry works and what the problems are. And I think what's going to happen is, I think this is going to be bigger than mobile apps and bigger than a lot of the recent innovations, because it will change how those industries work, because there are fundamental processes that are in those industries that AI can automate in ways that you just couldn't do anything with traditional technology.
So maybe, like, I'll just use an analogy. Like today, you can build a open AI chatbot that basically is unique for you, right? So it's got the underpinnings of the horizontal, and then you can basically say, I'm going to make this chatbot and I'm going to do customer discovery or whatever we decide to do, because we're adding a whole bunch of unique information specifically to it. So I get that part of it. But if you took an open source model, how do you verticalize it in going forward and taking the same concept where do you have to change the weights? Do you have to do anything to make it efficient for the problem you're trying to solve and then optimize for a production environment?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the problem. I think some of it, you can just load up all of the data from that industry and use it as inference to put out more specific outcomes. And I think that's sort of like a vertical LLM, right? If you just add a bunch of data from that industry. And we do that already, right? Like the notebook LM example you were talking about, we loaded in what is our podcast about? What are we looking for topics? And so that's kind of an example of just loading some industry data into a large language model, and now you've got sort of a vertical LLM. What I think is actually more interesting is some of these chain reasoning and layering on a workflow or a Boolean engine on top of an LLM with local, highly specific industry data, and then use chain reasoning to actually go through a process that a human would normally have to run, and then using the LLM with that industry data to solve the problems. Like I was just thinking of, manufacturing production scheduling is this notoriously difficult, time-consuming problem where you have all this data for your work orders. You've got a whole bunch of information about who's available on the floor, and you take all that data, you put that into LM, and you say, okay, I want to actually go through the process of scheduling work on my production floor. I think we're not that far away from having a vertical agent be able to do production scheduling, which is an expensive, job where people get it wrong a lot and it changes all the time. And I think AI is going to be a better solution for doing that.
So do you think for us in Wildfire and the founders that we're having, we will continue to use commercially available LLMs and then try to verticalize them? Or do you think that we'll end up start to use Meta and some of these other ones and they'll, either we host it or they host it?
I think at some point our startups are going to want to have their own AI framework. So there's another kind of opportunity for innovation in the next 5 years, which is actually building AI infrastructure inside of a startup, so that they're not necessarily going to need to subscribe to a OpenAI API limit, because I think that gets really expensive. And some of the Llama models, for example, are pretty darn good. You can run them on your own server, and you can load them up with some of your own data, and you've got your own AI infrastructure that scales really efficiently with you.
Yeah, cheaply too. Yep. So that's good. Yeah, well, I think it's pretty exciting. It just seems like we're starting to operationalize some of these tools. into kind of workflows and starting to build product around them, not a bolt-on to an existing product.
Yeah, and also not this vaporware stuff where people just build a chatbot and they load something in it and they call it a product. Like there's real value, I think, that can be unlocked. But it's going to take a lot of discipline. So, Todd, how do you feel like that's going to affect our startups in the upcoming, years? Because there's some real trends, I think, that will make it, they can build faster potentially than they have ever been able to do before.
Not potentially. It is true. It is true. So I think, if you think about where we were even a year or two ago, we talk about an MVP and we're talking about $40,000, $50,000 of money to like go hire a dev team to full stack development, whether it's Microsoft, Java, or whatever you're going to use. But it's going to take you some time and some money to go do it. I think then we had this kind of no code, low code solution. And I think it got a bad rap where people were like, yeah, you can build something. It's essentially a prototype and it doesn't test, it doesn't stand the test of time when you actually work with customers. And I think we've even had some experiences with like Journeyman and some of the other ones in our program where that really hasn't turned out to be true. They've spent less than $15,000 to get an MVP, and then it's scaled relatively well. And so, if you can build an MVP for $15,000 and get 1,000 customers on it, maybe that's a pretty good return. And I just want to be super clear. Our goal is not to build the Taj Mahal with any of these tools. I think what we're trying to do is say, we had a series of assumptions. You did some market research. You validated with the client on what you're trying to do. Now we're going to build you a product that is not the end all be all, but it's going to prove out, is there value in what in the problem you're trying to solve? And so I think these tools are getting much better. And I was there's an interview I did just recently with a custom development shop in San Diego, and basically they're kind of like looking at it too, saying they need to start using these tools to drop the cost down. And it's exactly what we're talking about. You build something to validate the idea. You validate the idea, generate some revenue, and maybe you end up rebuilding it on a more established technology stack that basically allows you to scale. And so you and I have been talking about, do you use Flutterflow with some sort of AI engine on the front end to do almost Figma-like prototyping, and then it turns into HTML and JavaScript for you? Is there a middle layer with your business logic that's in, BuildShip or some other tool? And then Supabase for the database component of it, really just a Postgres component. So I think the tools are getting easier to use. You don't have to have nearly as much technical knowledge. And I think the speed to market and validating your idea is getting shorter and shorter.
So the other thing that's interesting about this is you're talking about low code earlier and Flutterflow. So the problem with these low code tools is that they design, decent front end logic, right? But once you get into something complex, or you have, some specific business cases you need to go abide by, they start their user interfaces start to break down. So then you'd have to hire a developer and they'd have to fill in all the gaps. And it ended up just being a development project. Plus you had, maybe some low code stuff that doesn't look really nice. Well, what's happening now is you can use AI to write all that intermediary code and it knows the framework, right? It already knows what the low code layouts are going to be. So you can further compress time by doing all of the, design work in a low code tool and then use AI to fill in all the gaps. Yeah. And now you've sort of compressed almost all of the sort of manual work of building out of the system. Now, again, we're in the early days, so there's a lot of holes in this and problems in this, but you can see where this is heading, right? Over the next, 24 months, as these apps get better and more integrated, pretty soon the idea, and we're already seeing this, where you can develop an entire app just using an AI prompt. There's a lot of kind of early pain points with that, where it doesn't write good code or you can't do revisions without it falling apart. But I mean, the sort of convergence of low code, no code, and AI is just rapidly going to remove some of the technical barriers to launching apps, and the time is falling. I mean, and it also is taking down the barriers to somebody who just doesn't know all the back end technical stuff to go and build something like this.
I think the other one too that you haven't really hit on is just code portability, right? A lot of these no-code solutions basically try to lock you into a platform and an ecosystem. And I think what we've been talking about is these tools that allow you to rapidly prototype and then your code's portable. And so, and I think what we're trying to do is find a technology stack that has the maximum reuse with more traditional enterprise type development tools. And so, and I think that's a big part of this, right? So if we can do that, it's not throw away and rewrite. It's basically port over and improve.
Yeah, and you're starting to see startups that have tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of users on these sort of like, low code apps because the infrastructure also scales so much more efficiently now. So it's a good time to build. Like I get jealous a little bit of these founders when I first started my first company. I mean, Todd, you and I were like working with devs and hacking away at some bush league code that we didn't have any business writing for months on end. Like all this stuff now. I mean, I was playing around with Cursor, and you can like rewrite like 16 different files with like a 25-word text prompt. It's just incredible.
Yep. It is incredible. Yeah, which I think brings me down to like the point of what we look for in founders. And I think if I go back to our founding principles of how we think about interviewing founders for our program, we look for people that are coachable, right? That want to understand a good idea. We talk about people that can execute. And not only once they have a good idea, do they actually deliver on what they're saying, because we think that's a good kind of thing. But the last part of it is always been about some domain expertise. So basically making sure that these people actually have some information about the problem they're trying to solve. And so I'm kind of curious, like, it feels like that emphasis maybe has changed in 2024, going into 25, but I'm curious on your thoughts on that, Mike.
Yeah, so I would say that the domain experts are in the driver's seat, full stop. With all of these tools, we kind of talked about them when we were talking about AI and low code and also some of these other, just ways of compressing time. The technical piece of this is becoming less and less important to solving these vertical problems. So if you understand a market, you understand the problems that that market has, and you got to have a little vision, right? But if you have some vision of how some of these new tools could be used to make life better at those companies, I think that you can be a founder of a really high scale startup that can scale incredibly fast. And it also takes the pressure off of some of those non-technical founders, the domain expert founders, to know all of the technology and tools. And we at Wildfire are able to help complement them with some of these frameworks, tools, methodologies that just rapidly translate that knowledge about an industry into the tech stack that can make that happen. It really takes the pressure off them to figure that out. And they don't need to build this big expansive dev team. And we've got founders like, I think you mentioned Journeyman, who aren't necessarily needing to hire devs at all, getting to market and to revenue and in a position to raise before they even bring their first dev team members on, which is incredible. I mean, it used to be you couldn't even start a startup without at least a few developers.
So that's pretty cool. I guess one of the things that if I was a founder listening to this, I'd be saying, cool. It feels like we got the technology figured out, but what about the go-to-market? I'm a domain expertise. Does that mean like I need to be a sales guy and a marketing guy to go figure this stuff out because now you figured out my coding solution?
Well, so that's kind of comes back to a little bit what you're talking about with your go-to-market mastermind. So this go-to-market process and methodology is still the same sales funnel that it was, that's always been, right? People need to be educated on their problem. They need to get value out of the interactions that they have with you as a startup, and then they need to see that your product will solve their problem. What's different now is that a lot of those tools, they're easier and more accessible and less expensive, and secondly, you can use AI to build a lot of those assets. So combined with better tools that we have at Wildfire and AI to make those things happen, it really does also compress the amount of time that you need to go to market and the amount of money you need to go to market. So I think the traditional way that a founder would raise money is they would go to investors pre-revenue and they would raise their first round of capital to go and test their go-to-market thesis. What we're seeing is that founders are getting to revenue. I think you mentioned, where a couple of our startups are at. They're already into revenue. And at that time, they're raising money. Rather than raising money to go to market, they're raising money to ramp their go-to-market up. And so I think that it also means that the founder who doesn't necessarily need to have all that expertise in sales and marketing coming to us, we can put that in as a part of our process and teach them those principles and then provide the tools to help them go make that happen. So, it used to be you'd have to have those three things, right? You have to have domain expertise, you'd have to have technical, and you'd have to have go-to-market. And now you really just need the beginnings of the first one, which is you need to have the domain expertise, and then we can add those other two pieces as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe going back to your comment, it's never been a better time to be a founder, right? There's tools that we can put around you. If you bring that domain expertise, the technical parts, and the go-to-market pieces, there's training wheels in both cases to help you scale and let you focus on really solving the big problems in your business.
Yep. So Todd, we've got work to do at Wildfire. So what happens next for us?
Well, I think it's internalizing a lot of this, right? I mean, I think we talk about this, we see the trend lines, and then I think it's a lot of this is how do we build all these tools so that we can compress the time faster and faster and get people from business idea to revenue as quickly as possible. Tamara is one that's come to our program fairly recently, and she's been in town maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And so she's now running with her first customer and hopefully going to have revenue by the first of the year. And so I would love to see that be more of the norm, where we're seeing people crash the 6-month thing, and we can say we can do it even faster than that. But there's a lot of work for us to do to build these kind of reusable components, whether it's building more of that infrastructure in a technical standpoint or taking a lot of the lessons learned that we have in the mastermind and basically making it and almost productizing it so that there's tools and basically templates and prompts and things that they can go do to apply and just kind of crash that so that they don't make a lot of the same mistakes that you and I did.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is going back to what you're talking about with just our value system of running experiments, iterating really rapidly, incorporating our learnings. And that doesn't go for just our founders to live by when they build their startups. We got to live that too, right, at Wildfire. And I think that the faster we can do that, the faster and more efficiently we launch startups. And I think that that's going to give them a competitive advantage. And I think the same thing is true with the go-to-market tools. You and I just talked briefly about some of the tools that we have today, but there's a whole bunch of new AI tools that are going to be used this year. Even you wrote that article on the AI sales agent or companion that's going to be available to help salespeople. I mean, the same thing is true with SDRs and with going out and doing prospecting. Is there tools that we can use that are going to help our founders learn more quickly how to do that sort of challenger sales methodology and help them level up on that faster, especially for the founders who have never sold before or never built a marketing funnel before. So we have a mix of, we got to add new tools to our program to help them do that faster, and we're going to need to refine the methodology and just give them pre-flighted better starting points on some of those templates and everything else to go work on. So I think there's as much to do with go-to-market as there is with product build this year. Do you have anything to add to that, Todd?
I do, actually. I think one of the things that we're just kind of glossing over is just let's not even talk about AI, but just sending out email messages to lists of people has gotten more difficult, right? And so you and Priya had gone on a rabbit hole this year on just trying to understand how to build a current technology stack around marketing that basically actually works and scales. And I think one of the things that we're talking about doing is documenting that, productizing it for our founders. And I don't think that's trivial. And I don't think that's about a bunch of AI tools. That's about just some hard learnings and scraping our knees and going, don't do that again. And whether that's around burner domains and warming up domains and validating lists, whether it's about making sure you have email addresses that go to Google versus Office 365. There's a bunch of best practices in here that I think if you asked a founder just to go out and figure that out, they're going to come back bloodied. And I think what we're trying to do is basically build something with a bunch of best practices that says, do it this way. And you'll probably have 10% that won't work, but you can deal with iterating on that 10%. Do you agree with that? Do you feel I just don't want to lose sight? This is not all about AI. There's some basically just hardcore block and tackle that is important too.
Yeah, so AI can automate and improve something that works, but what it can't do is it can't take a broken process and make it more broken.
So it can make it more broken. I don't know if it doesn't fix it.
You get more garbage. So you get some garbage, you'll get more. And so, I mean, that example of the cold email marketing is it's a really defined process that we've had to painfully step-by-step go through. And this is back to the domain expertise, right? We had to become the domain experts in doing effective cold email marketing before we could teach AI to do some of it. Now, once you learn those tools, you learn the process, then you can use AI to improve your messages, to change when emails go out, all that kind of stuff. And then cloud computer use is pretty exciting. Like you mentioned it before, Todd, but we'd love for this whole machine of setting these up, getting them spooled up and growing. we'd like to make an agent that does that using cloud computer use or something like that. So I think you're right, Todd. It's a good nuance here that we don't. AI is not the panacea that will fix everything. It is really useful once you understand something deeply. And so I think that comes back to just the domain expertise, right? I don't think that we're going to win at this game by making AI bets in a bunch of different industries with smart people. They actually need to understand the problem. So, Todd, tell me a little bit more about when we keep using this word domain experts. What does that mean to you, and why is that going to change this year at Wildfire?
Well, I don't know if it's going to change dramatically. I mean, I think we'll just have a harder look on it. I think that I think it kind of goes back to everything we've been talking about for the last 30, 40 minutes. We're trying to build an infrastructure around people that are smart, that have vision, and want to make their industry better. And so if you're in an industry that basically has problems, and like every business has got problems, right? And I wrote that article on kind of the heartland just recently. I think it went out this week. And it was really just talking about there's precision ag, there's robotics, but the back office in a lot of these businesses is just shambles, right? It's Post-it notes, it's Excel spreadsheets, it's not very operationalized. And then there's a guy named Earl that's going to retire in 18 months. And he's been there for 35 years and he's got all the tribal knowledge. And so when Earl walks out after the big party, you guys are all going to be looking around going what do I do? And so I think that's what we're looking for is the people that have that domain expertise, that are interested in making it better, and then applying some of these tools and systems that we have around them to solving real world problems. These probably won't be billion-dollar companies, but they're going to be really good, niche, vertical SaaS companies that are going to provide jobs and potentially good exits for founders in this process, because you're not going to have to generate a ton of capital to go solve these problems. These tools will help you get to revenue. And if you need a little bit of capital to continue to scale, that's great. But you're not raising 50, 100, 200 million dollars to go solve these problems. And so the outcome and the control that you're going to have as you continue to scale is going to be an envious position, I think, compared to some founders.
Yeah, and the other thing is, because some of these tools are adding so much in terms of efficiency to those businesses, the other thing I feel like is changing here is, previously, in order for a tech accelerator or an investor to look at a startup, they had to have a huge TAM. Like the TAM had to be like a large dollar amount to be interesting. But with some of these AI things that we're looking at now, the TAM doesn't actually have to be as big because the problem that you're solving is so significant. And like the Earl problem, he's retiring. Well, that's a person. That how in the heck are you going to replace that person? Well, if you've got a tool that can scale with you that doesn't make you reliant on that, there's a lot of value to that. You don't need to have as big of a TAM to make a difference. The other thing is you actually need less capital because of all of the things we're talking about earlier. So you don't have to have these giant payouts with these unicorn type companies to make it worth solving the problem for these smaller industries that are really big problems, and I think make America stronger.
Yeah, there's another one that I wrote that isn't out yet, that was talking about how many people do you need to get to a billion-dollar company? Yeah. And I think a decade ago it was 2,000 people were needed to get to a billion-dollar company, and today it's 203. So by an order of magnitude, we've changed that. Yeah. And so I think this goes back to your point where you don't need as much money, mostly because you don't need as many people, yeah. Right? And so I think
because time
as much time, right? So not only are you compressing the time frame of it, but the number of people you need to solve these problems is just way more efficient. And I think the tools that we're talking about throughout this entire discussion is just creating more scale and efficiency in that. And so I think that's another pretty cool trend line for us. Yep,
I agree. All right, so Todd, we're passionate about helping founders. That's what we do, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what does this mean for founders? And I'll take the first one on this because I'm passionate about this. You know that I love to play with tools. And man, you just got to get in and play with this stuff. If the first time you load up, whatever, Claude or ChatGPT and you get it hallucinating or it doesn't give you, the results you're looking for, that doesn't mean that the tools don't work. It means that you might need to keep diving in deeper. And the other thing you need to remember is that we're in the early days. So we're in the first iPhone, like iPhone version 1, or not even iPhone version 1. And so a lot of these apps and systems are really disconnected right now. They're sort of one over here, one over there. This one does some of it. This one does some of it. And you've got to just learn what the strengths and weaknesses are of these tools to really get an idea as a founder of how could I change the industry I'm in using these building blocks. Because really what those are building blocks that you're going to build, the startup of tomorrow on as those tools evolve.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I'd echo that. I think, it's almost embarrassing. You just keep trying it with all different things and you see what happens, right? And so whether it's planning vacations or asking a question and telling you to explain it to you like you're an eighth grader, like there was I was talking to somebody and they were talking about how they moved to a new location. They wanted to create a bunch of raised beds so they could raise all their vegetables. And he went through this whole process where he was like saying, how many raised beds do I need? It's my wife and I. We eat a disproportionate amount of vegetables. We're not vegetarians, but we're close. And then it said, for our climate, what are the types of vegetables that'll grow all year in the different seasons? And then they said, what plants go with them to keep the bugs away? And he had blown out this whole plan within like 10 minutes. And his wife was like, this would have taken us forever to go to the library and research or do stuff online to come up with it. And they implemented it. And like literally, I think she was blown away. But it's just like the number of use cases that you hear are just interesting. And they're like, oh, I never would have thought of that. So yeah, validates your point.
I was learning how to make my wife got an espresso machine from me for Christmas. And so I'm in the unfortunate or fortunate job of learning how to run it. And man, the number of quad conversations I had about what the heck I needed to do to make espresso that didn't taste like, burnt charcoal was pretty incredible. But man, like the number of hours I would have spent like watching YouTube videos and doing Google searches to figure out like why my espresso machine was backing up in the nozzle was incredible. So, I mean, part of it is just you got to incorporate this into how you think and live and solve the problems you have in front of you to get an idea of what it can do. But I also think it's important to apply it when you're thinking about starting a company. So one of the things that we tell all of our entrepreneurs to do is don't do a traditional market analysis by looking at the agencies that publish market data. Go look at who what your TAM is, who your competitors are, and then drill the heck into differentiation. We actually do that internally now, where we review each startup, we analyze their competitors, and we use AI to do that. It collapses the amount of time, and I feel like some of what we're able to do, you'd have to have research analysts that we'd be employing, and that's what VCs have, and we're able to do that level of research on an idea, and not only just so the founder can have a better shot, but also to give them the best information that they need to decide if this is something they want to chase. But I think that if founders start to use these tools not only in their product, but also how they think about their business and analyze the world around them, I think they get a huge advantage.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I just think there's so many different ways, right? We were talked about, I was working with somebody on just defining a pain tree and saying, like, who's our beachhead? Like, what's the pain that they're really feeling? How do I get to them? What do you think the average cost is to reach them? What are the markets or the tools that could go do that? You're really having a conversation with somebody that, like has some interesting information. And I'm not saying it's all perfect and right. I want to be super clear that like, we're not saying do all this work and then basically just pass it off and say it's good. I think, it's good to like figure this out. And then once you feel like you've got something, then go validate a lot of those assumptions. Right. And so I do think that it's a multi-step process, but it does crash the amount of time that's taken. I mean, if you think about like what it was like for us to build business plans back in the day compared to putting something together today, like I was just, mentoring somebody at a local business plan competition and I gave her a bunch of prompts and she just blew it out, like literally like blew it out from start to finish. And I would say it was 85% good. And then we had to go back and tweak the last 10 or 15%. But, for what she was doing, perfect.
But I think you make a good point, though, that AI in its current incarnation and probably in the foreseeable future is not a replacement for critical thinking. What it allows you to do, and you and I have talked actually a bunch about this, about how do we take our time and reallocate it to higher level tasks. So when you use AI to do your competitive research, it doesn't mean that you spend less time doing competitive research. It means that you spend more time going into what makes you different and then drilling into that and really understanding that in detail. That's something that AI is not going to do for you, but it can take all of the busy work of collecting data about your market, competitors, and differentiation, and then at least distilling that into something you can drill into. And then that's where you start looking at each of your competitors, looking at their websites, finding out what you can do different, doing online searches, even on Reddit. So it just, all you're doing is shifting your time up into more of thinking
higher value
and less
higher value
of
stuff.
digging for data. Yep.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I just there's an opportunity there. And maybe the last part of this, Mike, that we've said, and we've probably said it 15 times already in this conversation, is just domain expertise, right? I think the more of this that you have, and you'd be surprised at what, if you've been in an industry for 3 to 5 years, maybe that's enough. Maybe you see enough of these problems and you understand it. Or if you've been in it for 10 years and you see all the struggles and you see Earl retiring, like those are the types of opportunities that we think are really good. And I have talked to entrepreneurs that say, yeah, but I'm not a technology guy. Yeah, I'm not a sales guy. I just know this stuff. And you're just like, well, maybe now's the time where there's enough tools around you to make this successful. I think it's a time to take a look at it and say, how do I leverage this domain expertise that I do have?
Yeah, I think really, clearly, if you are a domain expert and you have vision and you're willing to just grind it out, like you can do a lot. And all of the other pieces around how to do sales, how to build product, a lot of those barriers have come way down. But you got to have vision. You got to have an area of expertise where you know a lot about something so that you can add uncommon value. And if you're willing to do the hard work, AI is making it faster to do this. It also is lowering the barriers, meaning speed is your ally. And if you can go quickly and you can use that knowledge you have to quickly solve problems, then it's an amazing time to be a founder. And so, 2025 could be incredible, Todd. I mean, the barriers are coming down to do this. I think there is going to be people this year that start businesses that would have never been able to start a business even in 2024.
Yeah, I think that goes for us too, right? It's our success is predicated on you, me, and the team executing on what we say, right? We can't do 50 things. We have to focus on the 1 or 2 things that are most important. We've outlined a lot of the themes that we think are important for us, but it's incumbent, just like it is for any other founder, to basically stay focused, to create accountability, and then continue to execute and deliver on the promises that they made. And so I'm pretty excited. I mean, I think you and I have got a good pattern of doing this. I've been pretty impressed with what we've gotten done in the last couple of years. But to maybe close this out, I don't think there's been a better time. I mean, I'm super excited about like the next 10, 15 years. Like this is the through line. Like there is so much potential and opportunity.
Yep, I agree, Todd. And it's again, there's less of a barrier because the tools are so much better. But and that I think for some people that will cause them worry. Like I don't want to start a company right now because it would be easier for a competitor to enter the market. But I think the opposite for our founders is true, which is that if you have vision and you are able to think at those higher levels, you can go from taking something that takes years to build to months, and you can go build a business into a market at a speed that would have never been possible. And it also means that you don't have to raise giant amounts of capital to make this happen. Yeah. And a lot of founders have come to me and said, hey, I have to raise my seed round or I can't even start building. And I think if you're disciplined about what you decide to build in your version 1 of your product or your MVP, then we have not seen where a really good idea, we can't make it happen.
Doesn't win.
Capital. Yep. 5 years ago, I would have said yes. Like there's definitely businesses where you just needed $10 million, $20 million to make it happen. But the stuff we're looking at, especially in these niches, vertical agent areas, like capital is not the gating factor. It's execution and it's founder product market fit.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting. So, Mike, as always, man, it's fun to spend an hour with you and talking about this stuff. And this has been a discussion I think we've been having all the way through the year. And now this is maybe a more condensed version of it. Hopefully a little bit more, through line to it all and making sense. But as always, man, I appreciate you coming on the journey and doing this with me. It's been a ton of fun and I'm excited about 2025.
Well, it's an honor to be back on the podcast. I feel like the stakes keep getting higher because the distribution is mushrooming. So, man, I'm going to have to up my game on being a podcast guest because I'm going to get caught in like that funnel of podcast guests pretty soon. The stakes are going to get higher. So, I mean, Todd, in all seriousness, congrats on the success you've had on sort of the podcast. The quality of guests that you've been bringing to the podcast has been just outstanding, and also Substack. You make me think when I read those things. Todd asked me to proofread those and add value to them, and you're making it hard on me because you've been leveling up, and you're gonna cross 250,000 views before the end of the
crazy.
year. In fact, I think if I go look at the stats today, you may be crossing that. So, Todd, congrats on that. It's like always, it's an honor to do this with you. And man, what a year it's been.
I agree. Well, it's good. Let's go knock out next year, man. So I appreciate it.
Let's do it, Todd. Thanks again for having me.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. This feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.